Welcome back to another Woodgrafter review. Today we're looking at the Festool ETS 150 Oblique 3 EQ and some of its accessories. If that sounds good to you, stick around. The Festool ETS 150 Oblique 3 EQ is a random orbital sander, dual action sander from Festool. It's one of the first Festool tools I actually bought, and so far we've never even looked at it. But it's also a tool that I use every single day and I wouldn't be without. So let's start by unpacking it and see what we get in the box. It comes in a rather nice Sustainer 3, and opening the box we get the usual guarantee, the 3-year guarantee with the 30-day return policy and theft insurance, one of the best guarantees in the market. We get the usual Festool booklet that I don't think anybody ever tends to read, but we get one of those. We get the connection cord. We get a dust collection bag and a dust collection adapter. And obviously we get the Festool machine itself with the universal sanding disc already attached. We've got the usual black tray inside the Sustainer, the place for the sander, the place for the dust extraction, on a spare place here that's pretty good for putting spare pads and some sanding discs. And that's pretty much it. Nothing else inside the kit, no sanding discs, nothing else, that's it. Let's look at the machine. So this is the ETS 150 3EQ. Now the 150 means that it's a 150mm sanding disc. The oblique 3 means that this is going to move off centre by 3mm. They also do an oblique 5, exactly the same tool, but that's going to oscillate by 5mm off centre. And the EQ means it's a brushless electronic brake version, so it slows down incredibly quickly. On the top you can see it's got a number 3, the number 5 cleverly has a number 5 on it, and because they look identical you can quickly get the one that you need by referencing the number. It's got the usual Festool connection on the back. This is a 240 volt machine, but it also comes in 110 volt in the UK. And it's got dust extraction for the D27 hose. It's got a power switch and a button to lock the power on. It's variable speed going all the way to 6 and all the way down to 1, and that gives you a speed of 4000 to 1000 RPM on the 240 volt machine. The 110 machine goes from 6000 to 1050 RPM, so there is a slight difference in that. Weight wise it's 1.8 kilograms, therefore it's quite light and easy to use, although if you are using it above your head for an extended period of time you can feel it. You can use it one-handed and that's perfect on a flat surface. It's better to use two hands if you're using on a vertical surface or in the inverted position. And it also comes with a 5mm Allen key that hides away here in this clip at the back. You change the discs by releasing this Allen bolt in the middle of the pad, and that's obviously where the Allen key comes in. It can be a bit fiddly and it can be a bit tight. You've got to brace this pad with your thumb. There are no spindle locks on this particular device. Loosen off the screw and out pops your disc. You can see the profile of the nut here, these elongated sides, and that fits into the key areas on the back of the pad. And as you can see, as that rotates, you can see that that center cam there is off center, and that's the thing that's giving it the random orbit type functionality. While we're in here, it's worth having a look at how the airflow works inside this device. Inside this there's a small impeller that sucks air through this port here, this large port here at the front, this port here, and a small port down here. and that air is sucked into this bottom compartment. Actually, it's sucked into the sides of this bottom compartment, and that then blows air up and out of this series of holes around the edge of this rubber cowling. That airflow is then directed to these holes here inside of the pad, and in fact that air hole is a channel underneath this plastic plate that then blows the air up through this small series of holes in your pad. This is known as the Airflow 2 system. Now in the Airflow 1 system it had a similar idea, but the air was blown up through a centre series of holes here. Now regardless of whether you've got the Airflow 2 system or the Airflow 1 system that had the holes around the centre, the idea is to blow cooling air across this pad. And when you put your sanding disc onto this, you can see that that small series of holes are covered up. So as you're sanding, it's blowing cooling air onto this sanding disc, and therefore that's keeping this cooler. The reason that's important is obviously as you're using your disc, you've got friction between the sanding pad and the material that you're sanding. Friction causes heat, so your sanding paper starts to heat up, and as this gets warm it causes the dust that you're creating to clog, and that causes this disc to clog up, therefore shortening its useful life and reducing the quality of the finish. Festool claim that by using this airflow system underneath the pad, the disc will run 10 degrees cooler than without that. And that reduction in heat gives the pad a longer life and less clogging and a better surface. So that Airflow 2 system is a Festool innovation that I don't think you see on other sanders. Let me know if you have one that uses a similar concept, and it does add value. So the air we now know is cooling the disc. We've then got this second series of holes here, and that's where this metal impeller comes in. Now that starts to suck the air through that propeller and extracts it through this hole here, ideally into your vacuum. So as well as cooling the disc, the clever design then has multiple holes on here that's actually removing the dust as you work. And that's not only protecting you and the environment that you work in, but it's also making sure that once again dust is taken away from the material, less dust to sit on here, less to clog up, less dust to be reground into your surface as you're working. All about improving the quality of the finish as well as your health. We are going to put this through its paces in a few moments, so I'm going to drop the harder pad on ready for that demonstration. Now you understand how the airflow works, you will see that it's always forcing an exhaust path here, taking those debris away. And that's where this dust collector comes in. It comes with one of these dust collector bags, and this obviously allows the air to pass through the bag, but it traps the dust. And it's got a nut here that just locks onto this device. Fasten it down, and you're now ready for action. Now on the lid here you can start to see the accessories, the usual top row of why don't you buy some other products accessories, and then the more important ones to the device that we actually own. We've already had a look at the pad, and that's coming in 3 flavours. There's a soft one that comes with the machine, the grey pad. There's a medium one that's a black pad, and then the hard one that's the blue pad. The soft one is very good for curves such as spindles. The middle one is very good for internal arcs, and then the hard one is very good for flat surfaces. You get the soft one with the kit, and I've also invested in the hard one. I've not yet needed the medium one, so I haven't gone out to buy it. There's also 2 protector pads available. They connect to the back of your sanding disc, and then your paper sits on top of this one, and that gives you a cushion between the sanding disc and the material that you are using. Reduces vibration a little bit and also can protect the surface in some situations. I don't own those and haven't really found a use for them. There's then obviously the sanding accessory that we have here, and you can buy these additional bags, and you'll also buy the full assembly if you so wish. And there's a pretty picture here that shows you where everything fits in, which to be fair is not overly complicated. Now where it does get complicated is when you look at all the papers that you can get. So although we're obviously woodworkers and we're using this for wood, the device is also used in the automotive industry, metalworkers and other things as well. And the variety of papers that you can get reflect that. The one that most woodworkers would go for is the Rubin 2, and you can see cleverly symbolised here by a whole host of trees. And that comes in a P40 to a P220 grit. However, the granite paper is harder wearing and comes in a wider grit range from P40 to P1500. And although it's not explicitly for woodworking, it's for the automotive industry, paint preparation and finishing, and finishes that have got volatile chemicals inside it with the VOC symbol. Granite is exceptionally good for woodworking as well, and a lot of woodworkers have discovered that and are moving that because of the size of the range and the difference between granite and Rubin 2. They are both aluminium oxide papers. That's aluminium oxide particles using a resin to bond it to the paper. The granite paper has hardened aluminium particles inside it, and Rubin 2 is what you would normally find in any high quality sandpaper. Because of that hardened aspect of the granite, woodworkers are finding they're getting fantastic results and longevity out of the pads. And although it's slightly more expensive than the Rubin 2, the extra life you get more than pays for itself. So a lot of woodworkers have moved over to the granite on the Festool toolkit away from the Rubin 2. Like for like grit, you're going to get exactly the same finish on this, and as a woodworker you very rarely need to go past 220 grit anyway. So P40 up to 220 on the granite gives you exactly the same quality of finish, it just lasts longer and is harder wearing. Personally, I use the granite, and I use the P40 to 320 grit range on the granite. You've got a Platinum 2, which is really a very high grit, 4000. It's a silica based paper rather than an aluminium oxide, and it takes you up to a 4000 grit equivalent, which is phenomenally good for polishing out surfaces. You've got a granite net, which again is the same material, the hardened aluminium oxide, but it has a very wide grid inside it, which really improves dust extraction for heavy dust activities. You've then got a Brilliant 2, which is for a paint finish that takes you from 40 to 400, not something I'm interested in as a woodworker. You've also got these two yellow ones here, these Vlies, V-L-I-E-S, and it's a very similar material that you would get in the Scotch-Brite type pads, and you've seen me use this for putting finishes on. You can get two versions. You can get one that's got quite a heavy grit inside here and one that's got quite fine grits inside here. The heavy grits will indeed take your surface down and give you great preparation for finishes and also polishing surfaces once you've done. This one is fantastic for applying oils and finishing an oil-based product. Now, if you're familiar with the Festool Surfix oil finishing system, these are the Vlies that comes inside that kit. The green one is great for applying oil because it really pushes the oil down inside the grain. Exactly the same technique I use when I apply Osmo using one of these Scotch-Brite type pads. The white one is very good at then denibbing and polishing and giving you a high level of finish at the end of the day. And finally, you have a sapphire paper, which is incredibly aggressive, P24 to P80, long wearing, hard wearing, and is very good for those sort of properties where you need to take stock out quickly. There's also third-party products available for this, and you'll start to see fleeces and sheepskin mitts and all sorts that you can put onto your device. The final thing to show you in the accessory world is this sustainer, and this is designed to store your sanding discs, and inside you can see you've got another one of those black inserts, this time designed to take the 150mm discs. There's also a version of this for the 125 if you choose to get the smaller model. It's smaller and the paper lies quite flat in that way. This is not an essential product, I just find it useful for storing my papers away. I can see quickly how much I've got, I can quickly access the right one. I tend to put the used ones at the front of the pile, and then I can assess whether I want to use that or not, or whether I throw it away, and that just allows me to maximise the use of the material. Now, I can already see people typing away in the comments saying, yeah, but we've got the Rotex, that's much better than the random orbit sander because it will do both. let's quickly talk about that. The first thing is, what is a Rotex sander? Now there's two types of sander that you can get. Broadly speaking, there's an orbital sander and there's a random orbital sander. What's the difference? So a random orbital sander is known as a dual action sander, and if you were to look at the profile of the disc in use, the disc is always doing this against your surface. And when we looked inside, you remember we had that eccentric cam in the center there. That's the thing that's giving it that motion. And as well as that motion, it's also spinning. So in reality, it's doing something like this as it's in use. Just obviously a lot faster. There's also a clutch mechanism that sits inside here, which means it's possible to stop this pad spinning in this direction. And if you put too much pressure down on this, this will stop spinning. It will still do this, but it will not do this spinning. And that's because of the clutch mechanism. It's not direct drive from the motor. An orbital sander is a direct drive. It's driven by gears from the motor itself, and therefore this is rotating in this direction all the time. Now in the Festool system, it also does move a little bit like this as well, so you do get some of the benefits of a random orbit sander, but fundamentally it's an orbit sander that's always going to be turning, and no matter how much you press down on this, this will keep on turning. That makes an orbital sander incredibly good for aggressive work, taking large amounts of material off stock very, very quickly. But it also means it's not that good for fine finishing work. It can be done, and there are demonstrations around it, so don't discount it for finishing work, but it's not as good as this one. And the reason is that if you catch your material, it will gouge in quite quickly. If you press too hard, it will leave surface marks on your material, because this is not going to stop and forgive you. The random orbital sander is much better for finishing work, and it's very hard to gouge the material, and if you press too hard it will stop. Now it will still damage your surface, because even when it stops rotating it's still going to be doing this, and it will leave swirl marks on your material. The idea of the Rotex is it will give you both, and it has a mode that you can put it into random orbit for finishing work, and it has a mode that will engage a gear and drive this directly, therefore putting it into the orbital mode. So you can now take large stocks off, flick a switch, and then go into finishing. And that's the advantage of the Rotex system. The disadvantage of the Rotex system is it's more expensive to buy first time, and it's a much bigger, heavier machine to allow for that additional gearing in the orbital mode. So as always, it depends what you want to use it for. If you're going to be in a situation of taking large stock off and then finishing, then the Rotex is a very, very sensible thing to do. I don't tend to use a sander for taking off rough stock. I tend to use a hand plane, or as I move forward, my planer jointer is going to take over that initial preparation of the stock. So for me, it's not an awful lot of use. You're different, you take your choice. I saw a demonstration on YouTube, and I'll leave a link to it. In fact, I'll leave two links, the original demonstration, then the one that Peter did over at the Newbury workshop, where they took a rough piece of stock and they brought it down to a finish purely by using the Rotex sander. I want to see whether I can do a similar thing with my random orbital sander. Now bear in mind, this is a 150/3, so that oscillation we spoke about is only 3mm. So I've got a sander that's for finishing work, fine finishing work at that. But I'm going to use the grits I've got in my box, and I've got a piece of cherry knocking round the workshop, and we'll just try and smooth off this end and see how we get on. And that will show the machine in use, and we can talk about a few things as we go through that demonstration. Now I'm just going to work on this end of the board here, and then we'll have a before and after shot as we progress. So we'll start off with a 40 grit sandpaper, pretty aggressive. Now as you can see, I've got no dust escaping at all. Just use a tissue across the surface. Got some dust on there, but not an awful lot of dust. And there's no dust collecting on the device, and the pad is pretty clear. So dust collection is phenomenal once you use it with a sensible dust extraction, which is how you should be using these things. Anywhere there's no dust escaping into the air. See, the cherry's beginning to clean up. It takes its time, but then it's a very fine, non-aggressive machine. So I'll continue to clean this piece up and see how we get on. So it's doing a lovely job. That's probably finished on this grit now, and you can see the paper isn't clogged at all. It's not even warm, it's cool to the touch, so that airflow system's working really well. That was the 40. Now I'm going to come in with the 60 grit and we will give this a go. Again, you can see how clean the disc is. Now coming in with an 80 grit. Now a 120 grit. Now you can really see the grain beginning to develop, and this is really smooth. Not only is it, you know, not rough anymore, but it feels incredibly flat. And this board did have a slight bow in it. And look at this grain really beginning to develop now, really polishing out quite nicely. Very impressive, and still not that much dust. So that one's done. That was the 120. We're now going to come in with a 180. And my final grid is going to be a 320. Just going to give the board a bit of a wipe down now. Don't want any dust fibres at all being worked back into this surface. And look at that, look how beautiful that's looking. Really, really gorgeous. And there you have it. From rough stock to cabinet quality, just using the Festool ETS 150/3 EQ sander. And that says it all. And look, I'm wearing a white shirt deliberately, and I've got no red dust on me, which you would expect to have. Looking around the bench, no dust here either. Clean piece of tissue. Let's just check ourselves. Next to nothing. So that works really well. And just for a bit of fun, we'll throw a bit of Osmo onto this surface. And what do you think? Good enough? And I don't think you can argue with that. That's a lovely finish. Really nice, really flat, really smooth. I probably should have stopped around about the 180 mark, so I've probably oversanded this a little bit, took it to 320, so that will now begin to close the pores of the wood, and therefore the oil won't penetrate well enough, but that's good. Didn't take that long. Now it's not going to be as quick as the Rotex, and if you were using the Rotex you would have used it in the orbital mode on the coarser grits, and then we would have switched it to the random as we went to the higher grit. But that's proof. That's a really good sander. Dust collection's phenomenal. It works well. It's never let me down. It's very robust. Hope you found this useful. The Festool ETS 150/3 EQ. Catchy name for a great sander. See you next time.